The wind over the farmlands of Redfield. Kansas always carried a certain loneliness with it, an endless, low moan that slipped between the husks of dried corn and the rusting windmills scattered across the fields. At night, that sound grew sharper, almost deliberate, as if the plains themselves whispered warnings to anyone foolish enough to wander beyond the town's narrow streets. This year, the warning went unheard. For months, the adults of Redfield had muttered about the seniors, about the reckless parties in barns and empty fields, the drinking, the injuries, the whispered tragedies that never quite made it into the newspapers. The town was small, and small towns always imagine disaster before it arrives. But in Redfield, the fear was real. A boy had broken his spine jumping from a roof of a grain silo. A girl nearly froze trying to walk home drunk through the fields in October's bitter wind. And yet the parties continued. The responsibility weighed heavily on Ms. Clara Jennings, the English teacher whose quiet face carried the exhaustion of a woman who had seen far too many young lives wobble on the edge. She had taught 3 generations of Redfield's children. She had watched their parents age and their grandparents pass, and still she stood at the same chalkboard, writing the same poems, trying to hold the frayed edges of the town's youth together. So she came up with a plan, a safe event, a controlled one, something festive, exciting, but harmless. A guided pre-Halloween celebration the seniors could help organize, while the freshmen enjoyed a scare or two in a supervised environment. And for that purpose, there was only one place that fit perfectly. 2 miles outside Redfield, past the line of dying poplars and the rusted gate that no one had repaired in decades, stood the Granger house, an abandoned farmhouse long emptied of life but never of stories. The boards were warped, the paint peeled like shedding skin, the windows blind with dust and spiderwebs. Children used to dare each other to touch the front door. Adults preferred to pretend the house did not exist. To Clara Jennings, it was perfect. Halloween decorations were easy enough to arrange. Papier-mâché skulls crafted in art class, plastic bones, a box of cheap rattlesnakes someone ordered from a party catalog, a fog machine borrowed from the theater department. And then came the principal, Harold F. McKinley, 60 years old with a body that still looked stiff from his years as a football coach, was a man who loved theatrics more than anyone wanted to admit. He had a deep, booming voice he used even in empty hallways, a smile that stayed too long on his face, and a fondness for big gestures. When he heard Clara's idea, he clapped like a delighted child. A haunted house. Perfect, he exclaimed. Let me be part of the show. The final scare. You know, something memorable for the little ones. Clara had smiled politely, thinking he meant another speech, another dramatic monologue. But McKinley had something quite different in mind. Picture it, he said, eyes shining. They find me hanging. A fake rope, of course, a fake scene, but imagine the fright. And what a laugh afterward. Clara hesitated. The idea felt off. Not merely inappropriate, but wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. But Harold McKinley was her superior, and he was insistent. So she agreed, and regretted it long before the night began. The sun sank early that evening, smothered under thick clouds that seemed too low, too heavy, as if the sky itself wanted to crush the old Granger house. Clara arrived before the students, carrying bags of candles, cheap lanterns, and her worn Nikon camera. The air smelled of soil and mold, the house of dust and time. Inside, the wooden floorboards sagged under every step. The hallways were narrow, the wallpaper stained, torn in strips like rotting skin. The wind whistled through the cracks around the windows, making them shudder as though something outside kept trying to come in. The decorations were already set, scattered with chaotic enthusiasm. Skulls leaned against broken furniture. Plastic bones protruded from piles of dead leaves the wind had dragged into the hall. Someone had tied chains so they would clank when the door moved. The effect was crude, but in the dusk-dark interior of the abandoned house, the shadows did most of the work. Clara walked through each room, her flashlight cutting thin tunnels of light through swirling dust. The house was colder than she expected, much colder. Every breath came out as a ghostly mist. In the back room, The smallest and darkest, she found the principal. Harold McKinley stood with surprising theatrical commitment, already draped in a long black cloak that brushed the filthy floor. His face and chest were smeared with streaks of bright red paint, so fresh it dripped down his neck. "How do I look?" he asked, spreading his arms with an unsettling grin. Clara forced a laugh. "Horrifying, truly." Beside him hung the rope. It dangled from a beam in the low ceiling, knotted into a crude noose. McKinley had insisted on setting it up himself. He said he wanted it to look authentic. Clara had argued for safety precautions. He had waved her off. "The rope's not meant to hold me," he said. "Just for show. I'll stand on the stool. When they arrive, I'll groan and twist a little. You snap a picture, then we all have a good laugh." His excitement was almost feverish. As Clara watched him test the rope, carelessly, foolishly, something cold crawled beneath her skin. The way he pulled at it, the roughness of the hemp, the tension in the beam, it felt wrong, too real. But she said nothing. She left the room, and behind her, the house exhaled a long, shuddering creak. By the time the students arrived, the wind had risen to a howl. The old house groaned as though the storm itself pressed its weight upon it. Yet excitement buzzed among the freshmen and seniors alike. Flashlights flickered as they filed inside, their laughter thin with nerves, swallowed swiftly by the darkness. Clara stayed near the entrance, guiding each group along the path. Through the hall, down the narrow corridor, past the slanted archway, into the pitch-black room where Harold McKinley waited. Or where he should have been waiting. But something felt wrong from the beginning. Not one student screamed when they saw him. Not one gasped. Not one seemed shocked or frightened. They only murmured, "Wow, looks so real. Great acting. Creepy." And they moved on. Clara frowned. Acting? Harold wasn't supposed to stay silent. He wasn't supposed to hang limply. He wasn't supposed to be so still. Her unease grew until it was a physical thing clawing at her ribs. Finally, after the last group went through, she walked toward the back room with her camera, telling herself she would scold Harold for overcommitting to the role. The hallway seemed darker now, narrower, the air colder. With each step, the boards groaned, as if something large and unseen shifted deep beneath them. When Clara pushed open the door, her flashlight flickered. The room swallowed her light, clinging to the shadows like hungry fingers. She lifted the camera, turned on the flash. That was when she saw it. The overturned stool, the taut rope, and Harold F. McKinley's body, swaying gently, his face swollen blue beneath the dripping streaks of paint, the noose biting into his throat. No groaning, no acting, no breath, only the soft, wet creak of the rope turning. And Clara Jennings understood, too late, that the house outside Redfield had gotten its first real ghost. The scream never left Clara Jennings' throat. It rose, stuck, and dissolved, absorbed by the suffocating dark of the Granger house, as though the walls themselves swallowed sound. Her flashlight trembled in her hand, scattering nervous beams across the collapsing room. Dust drifted like falling ash. The rope creaked again. Harold McKinley's body dangled with a slow, nauseating sway. Left, right, each movement too natural to be an act and too final to misinterpret. Clara stumbled backward, her heel catching on broken floorboards. The nausea surged up her spine, a cold bloom of panic spreading beneath her ribs. Her mind screamed, "Do something," but her body refused. She forced herself to move. "Harold," she whispered, even as she knew. The house seemed to exhale at the name. Her fingers twitched toward him, but fear lashed her hand back. She took a step closer. The rope strained. His shoe brushed the toe of hers. His face, paint streaks melted into the purple of asphyxiation, had twisted into an expression she could not bear to interpret. What a shock, realization, or something else, something he'd seen in his final seconds. Another step, another groan of the boards. Then, a sound behind her, soft, deliberate, like a foot dragging very slowly over wood. Clara spun around, flashlight slicing through the dark. The beam cut across the hallway, empty, just the house, just its decay, just its breathing, because the house did breathe. She felt it in the walls, the floor, the air, something unseen expanding and contracting like the lungs of a sleeping animal. Her heart hammered violently. She backed toward the doorway, dragging her gaze from the corpse. She had to find the students. Call for help. Get out. Get out now. She clutched her camera with fingers numb from cold and fear. But as she reached the hall, she froze. The students were gone. Not gone from a house, gone from the property. The air felt empty where minutes earlier it had been full of nervous laughter and whispering. She hadn't heard them leave. She hadn't heard a door slam or a car start or footsteps fading into distance. The silence was wrong. Too thick, too complete, as if someone had draped a heavy cloth over the world. Clara forced herself down the narrow hallway. Each step sounded too loud, echoing unnaturally like the house was mimicking her movements half a beat later. She kept her flashlight low, steady. The walls pressed tight around her, stained wallpaper peeling back to reveal dark wooden ribs of the old structure. At the turn, she paused. Something had changed. The skulls, those cheap papier-mâché props the students had made, were no longer scattered on the floor. They were lined up neatly along the wall, all facing her direction, their painted black eye sockets staring. She swallowed a whimper. "This is not happening," she whispered. "It's just my mind, just fear." But the skulls were positioned with too much precision, too intentional, and behind them, faint smears of something dark streaked the wall. The color looked wrong, too thick, too glossy to be paint. Her flashlight flicked once, twice, and then footsteps above her, slow, heavy, crossing the floor of the second story where no one should be. The house had no safe staircase to the upper level. Its structure had collapsed long ago. The students hadn't been allowed up there. Clara pressed herself against the wall as the footsteps moved overhead, paced once, then stopped directly above her head. The floorboards groaned under a weight that seemed almost deliberate in how slowly it shifted. Silence, followed by a long, dragging sound. Something heavy being pulled. Clara ran. Her shoes slapped against the uneven boards as she stumbled through the hall, past the crooked furniture and fake snakes, past the shattered doorway that led to the entry hall. She saw the front door and felt a rush of relief, until it slammed shut, violently, forcefully, as though pushed from the outside. Her flashlight flickered. The temperature dropped. Her breath poured out in white clouds. "No," she whispered, tugging the doorknob. "No, no." It refused to turn. The lock clicked into place on its own. Behind her, something groaned again. The structure of the house seemed to stretch, settling deeper into its own bones. "Let me out," she shouted, pounding her fist on the wood. "Let me out." And then came the chains. The very chains the students had rigged to the doors for effect. Cheap lengths of metal meant to rattle harmlessly, suddenly jerked upward as if yanked by invisible hands. They whipped across the floor, clattering madly against the doorframe, twisting into a knotted mass that sealed the exit like a barrier. Clara staggered back, trembling. The house didn't want her to leave. From somewhere deep in the hall, Harold McKinley's rope creaked again. No rescue was coming. No students remained. No one knew she was alone with the corpse. Clara's knees weakened, but panic forced her upright. She had to find another exit. Any exit. Even a broken window. Even if she had to tear through the ancient boards with her bare hands. She turned toward the kitchen. It was colder there. So much colder. Her flashlight illuminated the room in jagged slices. Cabinets hanging open, drawers pulled halfway out, as though someone had been frantically searching through them long ago. The sink was stained with rust. A single spoon lay in the middle of the counter, as if it had been placed there deliberately. She stepped inside. A shadow passed behind her. Her breath hitched. She whipped around. The hallway was empty. The flashlight dimmed again. She smacked its side with the base of her palm. Light returned in a sickly beam. As she turned back to the kitchen, the spoon was gone. Her pulse thrashed. She scanned the counter. Clink. Something dropped to the floor behind her. The spoon. She backed toward the wall. "No," she whispered, voice shaking. "No, this isn't real." A whisper breathed behind her ear. Not in any language she knew. Not a word. Just a sound, wet, hollow, hungry. She lunged for the kitchen window, slamming her palm against the glass. It didn't move. The frame was sealed tight by layers of time and rot. Behind her, something shifted. A board in the hall snapped. Clara turned slowly. Harold McKinley's body was no longer in the doorway where she had last seen it. He was there, hanging, swaying, but closer. At the end of the hall, the rope above him dragged along the ceiling as if being pulled from room to room. His feet brushed the floor in limp arcs. Still dead, still silent, but moving toward her. Clara stumbled backward, hitting the sink. The flashlight slipped from her hand and clattered to the tiles, its beam rolling wildly across the room, catching the door frame, the floor, and the rope tightening above Harold's body as though something was reeling him in like a puppet. She choked on a sob. The corpse swung again. Closer, closer. Clara grabbed the flashlight, scrambled toward the back door, and gasped. It was open, wide, a black rectangle leading into pure night. She didn't think, didn't question. She ran, out into the freezing darkness, into the whispering wind, into the wide, empty fields. But the house did not release her easily. Behind her, the rope snapped. A heavy thud shook the floorboards, and something ran after her, not stumbling, not dragging, running. Fast, too fast. Claire didn't look back. She sprinted into the cornfields, their dry stalks slashing her arms, her face, her clothes. The moon hid behind bruised clouds. The world shrank into a labyrinth of black shapes and rustling whispers. Her lungs burned. Her breath tore out of her in ragged sobs. Every step felt stolen, borrowed from death. She didn't know how far she ran. She didn't know when the footsteps stopped following. She only knew that sometime later, minutes or hours, she collapsed at the edge of a narrow service road under a flickering street lamp. Someone found her there, shaking uncontrollably. Not the students, not Harold, not anyone she knew. A truck driver passing through Redfield. He radioed for help. He wrapped her in his coat. He asked where she had come from. Clara could not answer. Her throat felt sealed shut. But when she turned her head toward the fields, she saw the Granger house in the distance. And in its single upstairs window, the one that should not have existed, a figure stood watching her. Tall, still, shadowed, and hanging,